Who would have ever thought back in the day that what is a woman become the biggest question of our time now in 2024, 300,000 years into the existence of humanity? But lo and behold, here we are today. And that question, believe it or not, has now made it to the UK Supreme Court to answer on the 27th of November. Let me read to you from this article from Unheard. Yesterday, I made my way to court to witness a case that will hopefully establish in law an important question: what is a woman? If we lose this case, we lose our rights as women in law and in policy. The work of decades could be undone all too quickly. The case began in 2018 when the Scottish Government passed a law which took as its definition of woman anyone who identifies as one. So that's like asking, what is a pencil? Anything that you call a pencil. It's not satisfactory, is it? And this is something that we've always known. We've always known that a woman is an adult, female, human. But this is something that has become controversial and politically loaded. You're not allowed to say this anymore. You're no longer allowed to say that a woman is an adult human female without suffering sometimes severe consequences, being cancelled. An advocacy group for Women Scotland challenged this in court and won the definition of woman as being anyone who identifies as a woman. But then the Scottish National Party replaced this with guidance suggesting the definition of a woman in the Equality Act 2010 is not just a person born female, but is also changed for all purposes by the Gender Recognition Act. Last year, 4 Women Scotland went to court once again to challenge that definition, but lost. The group's appeal will now be decided by the Supreme Court. So that's the case that was heard on the 27th to re-examine what is the definition of a woman. Inside the packed courtroom were a range of women's rights groups and associated activists, all of whom have been attacked and labelled TERFs for their beliefs in the past. I hate that term, TERF. Trans, exclusionary, radical feminists, which implies that it's a radical, extremist belief that a woman is an adult human female. And it's been used over the last few years to abuse ordinary, decent women and men, anybody who speaks up for the rights of women today. So back to the women's rights groups. Sex Matters, Scottish Lesbians, the Lesbian Project, which I co-direct with Kathleen Stock, and the LGB Alliance were all present. Meanwhile, Amnesty International and EHRC, Equality and Human Rights Commission, have lent their support to the Scottish Government. Much of the build-up to the case has focused on a particular detail in the Scottish Government's submission, which claims that maternity provisions can be extended to pregnant men. Pregnant men in quotes. So here's where I stand on the whole idea of pregnant men. Yes, it is possible for trans men to get pregnant. So there are pregnant trans men who were born biologically female and decided to transition to male and identify as male, but still have female reproductive organs. So does that make them pregnant men? Or does that make them pregnant women? Because the fact that they can still get pregnant, surely that means that they're a woman. In my view, they are pregnant trans men, which isn't the same as pregnant men. Trans actually has a relevant meaning in that expression. During a press conference in Edinburgh, Scottish First Minister John Swinney stated, in response to a journalist's question, that males cannot become pregnant. Seated next to me in courtroom 1 yesterday was former SNP MP Joanna Cherry, who noted online, "I'm pleased that John recognises this biological reality. I'm presently sitting in the UK Supreme Court watching the government's lawyers argue the opposite. Again, who would have ever thought that we would see a day where the government will be arguing that men can get pregnant? Yet there is another important aspect to this case, namely the right of lesbian clubs to legally exclude trans-identified males. Okay, I need to think about this. The right of lesbian clubs to legally exclude trans-identified males. So these are men who have transitioned to become women, and so they want to go to lesbian clubs because they are still attracted to women. So they are straight men, heterosexual men who are attracted to women, who decided to become women so that they could be lesbians. You've got to puzzle these things through. So I can see that being an issue in lesbian clubs, because women who are lesbians prefer vag over dick, to put it crudely. But now you've got a geezer with a dick coming into a lesbian space claiming to be a lesbian. How do you feel about that? And this makes me think of cases I've heard in recent years of male criminals going into female prisons because they have decided to identify as female, and the prison service has had to accept this. And in some cases, these men have gone on to SA, I'm not allowed to say sexually women in prison, and get them pregnant. So back to the case of lesbian clubs excluding trans women. A lawyer representing the Scottish government, Ruth Crawford, denied that obstructing the right would create a chilling effect. On top of this, she claimed that the inevitable conclusion of a For Women Scotland victory would be that male-born holders of a GRC, stay with me there, I'll talk about GRC in a second, who, she argued, are seen as having changed sex in the eyes of the law, would remain men until death for the purposes of the Equality Act, which Ruth Crawford is arguing is unfair. High comedy was on offer amid arguments about heterosexual men with a GRC, gender recognition certificate, becoming lesbians, while those without a GRC remain heterosexual men. So let's think about that. If you're a straight man who decides to transition to become a woman, you can get a certificate that says that you're a lesbian. So you're still a straight man, but you're in a woman's body, so you're now a lesbian. But without that GRC certificate, you're still considered a straight man dressed as a woman. The utter absurdity, sexism and homophobia of the gender identity argument is clearly being exposed in Britain's Premier Court. Regardless of the result inside the courtroom, more people will surely be convinced that the Scottish Government's case is a ludicrous and dangerous fiction. So, I'm quite curious about this GRC, Gender Recognition Certificate. Like, what are the criteria to get one? Can you get one if you've got a beard? What is the criteria for whether or not you can get a GRC and go from heterosexual man to transgender lesbian? I've known trans people all my life, and all the trans women that I've known wanted to be straight women, not lesbians, because they started off as gay boys, and instead of being a gay boy or a gay man, they wanted to be a straight woman, because they felt that inside they were a straight woman that is attracted to men, and they tended to be very feminine You know, like the lady boys of Bangkok, beautiful, feminine lady boys, or trans women who, you know, when you meet one, that they were meant to be a woman, and they were straight women. They weren't lesbians. They weren't straight men who decided to become lesbian women. They were gay men who decided to become straight women. So this GRC for trans lesbians, I just wonder, like, how do they assess whether or not you get the certificate? Is there like some sort of a test? Perhaps some of you guys who know more about this already know the answer and could enlighten me. Can you get a GRC if you've got a beard, for example? And let's say you are a man who identifies as a woman and you have your GRC. Does that exclude you from getting a prostate exam at age 40? Just wondering. So what are your thoughts on this whole what is a woman debate? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. And if you're not already done so, please hit the subscribe button for more of my daily unhinged takes on the news of the day that is not on the news.